Ariel Carr. Welcome to the WorkPlay podcast.
Yes, thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to chat. We've actually never had someone like you on the show before. I think the listeners are really going to get a deep dive into all things like prepping, content creation, because you yourself own a studio here in Miami, which is going to be so much fun to just dive into. But first, can you let us in on who you are, how long you've been in business, and then what exactly the business is?
I'm Ariel Carr, as you mentioned. I'm a serial entrepreneur, and I actually started out as a marketing consultant, and I was generating all of my leads through social media. So I really learned how to leverage Instagram in particular with like visual images to find my target audience, and I really understood how to talk to them, which led me into creating a content studio. I knew that high quality images are so important to presenting yourself as a brand. And once I became a mom of twins, it was a little bit harder for me to keep up with my business. I really want to just get back in the world. Like my girls are now 2. So I came up with the content creation studio to just get myself back out there and also still be in the same world.
I love this like influencer to content creation to studio owner. That's like huge business moves right there. Something that I want to dig into though, because I don't think people realize this, and I think it's coming from your mouth, it's better. This idea of high quality visuals. Why do you think that is so important? Where's the connection there? Because so often I think that business owners in general don't emphasize why we need high quality visuals. I think you of all people can let us in on that.
Having something professionally done conveys a certain message. It attracts a certain clientele. So it's very important when you're trying to present yourself a certain way to look the part. Once you are able to do that on a consistent basis, the algorithm really likes that. It really benefits you once you're able to show up that way. I just think it's something that every business owner needs to learn how to do is align their brand image with a certain photographer or a certain space, a certain look, and then have that consistency because that really does build your brand.
That consistency in terms of what it looks like visually. Just explain that a little more. Like, how do we stay consistent with a certain aesthetic, if you will, or a certain vibe? And
Yeah.
how does that connect to the message?
When I was first becoming an influencer, I studied what performed well. And what tends to perform well on Instagram in particular are pretty pictures. Like people just like pretty things. And it just like, you have to have that aesthetic and you really have to keep up with it now because that's like the standard now. You have to study lighting. What about lighting attracts people? It's always natural light or something bright. When it comes to your outfits or how you're styled, can that coordinate with the colors of your brand? When it comes to like your environment, what's going on around in the images or the videos, that really brings everything together. For instance, when I designed my content studio, I did keep to neutrals, not just because it's trendy, but just because if you do have colors for your brand and your brand images, it'll pop out, right? It won't go into the background of everything so colorful and confusing. I really kept that in mind. That's something people should keep in mind as well.
I agree. And even as we creative direct workplace shoots on a quarterly basis, our creative directors are constantly looking for studios that have that base of neutrality because we're going to be able to get the vision, right? It's like we're able to come in and control where the colors are because there's not contrasting colors in the studio. Nothing is worse than trying to find a studio and all you can find is nothing with natural light. And we've got like painted walls that's a certain color. It's like, it's so hard to match the vibe. So I think you're so smart in doing that when building out the studio. What were some of the things that, based off of all of this studying and research that you did, what were some of the elements that you brought into the studio to make sure that could be a seamless execution to any creator coming in and creating content inside of the studio?
I do a lot of planning prior to like bringing in the pieces. I research everything. I created a mood board. I created a marketing plan. I was trying to figure out like really what people want as a business owner. Is not really what you want, it's what people are looking for. I was asking some friends, like, what do you look for when you want to book a studio? Like, what is it that made you click on that certain studio and book that space? And so I got a lot of insight. And then I looked at Pinterest, of course, and like tried to come up with a certain vibe that was different from my competitors. I landed on like the neutral sofa and like the Tulum inspired plants that I have because I really wanted it to be bright and airy and versatile.
Yeah, our creative directors are looking for studios is like versatility. Can we stay in the studio for 5 hours and get 5 hours of variety in the shots that we're getting? What are some of those variety pieces that you have? What allows there to be a lot of different options when going in?
I have about 3 different setups. I have like the living room area, which is a couch and a coffee table, and that's like its own vibe over there. I have a like selfie mirror corner with like some pottery and a wooden full-length mirror and also some plants over there. I have a full kitchen and then a dining area and a desk and chair. So if you want the office look, if you want to have like a more home cozy vibe, like you can get all those different looks in one space.
I love that. And what are some of the things with lighting? Some of the features that I noticed right away is like you have these curtains that allows you to diffuse the light. And I don't expect anyone listening, if you're not a photographer, which most people are not, to understand like the diffusing of the light. To have that option is so nice. Was that intentional? Are there other intentional lighting tricks that you did in the build out to allow some of these creative things to happen?
That part was intentional. Not only did I just think it looked nice to have, but you do have the option of adjusting your light. So we have blinds as well as drapes to like really adjust to like the day. Because we have north, east, and west facing windows, the sun is present throughout the whole day. So it was really nice to just be able to play with like your lighting in that sense.
Having that as a feature, even if you're not shooting in Miami, when you are looking for a studio, I think those are things that people don't think about. Like, how is the light when you get into it? I think anyone can put up like a pure space listing or a listing of their space and have it look bright and airy. And then when you get there, it's like dingy
Dark.
and
Yeah.
dark. And it's like, what are we supposed to do with this? Do you have any extra lighting, or are you solely focused on natural light? And is there a reason for that?
So at this stage, I don't necessarily have like professional photographer lighting. A lot of people bring their own equipment because they like what they work with. But I do have video lighting. So if you're recording a podcast, I have like the flat panel lighting for now. I might invest into photographer lighting in the future, but there's literally so much natural light that when people get there, they're like, oh, I didn't realize it was this bright. And so a lot of photographers are working without any equipment at all in our space.
I like that, like the lighting piece of it, working with natural light, it comes off as more natural, more human. That's what people are looking for in their content anyway. I'm very curious to kind of go back to your research in terms of like what works on Instagram. How do you feel about this, like almost like TikTokification of the platforms where people are like, okay, I don't necessarily need to show up like sometimes in my content looking put together.
Yep.
I almost feel like having that more put together look on Instagram is still the vibe of Instagram. Because I go on TikTok and I'm like, I've made content on TikTok and it works where it's more like in the moment candid. But something about Instagram, it's like the fabric of that platform is more so about the aesthetic, the look. It was meant to be a photography platform. Do you agree with that hot take? Because I just think that people are like, oh, this is working really well on TikTok. This is what everyone's doing on TikTok. Let me bring that strategy over to Instagram. And like,
It
it's not
doesn't perform the
working.
same. I agree 100%. The cultures are completely different. The culture of TikTok is completely different from the culture of Instagram. It is important on Instagram in particular to kind of be put together. You can come across relatable. I really think that is making like a resurgence on Instagram and stuff, and especially because TikTok is like, no one knows what's happening with the platform right now and the ban. So people are kind of bringing the TikTok vibes to Instagram, and you know, you can still build a community just showing up authentically. I think at the end of the day, what you should do, but Instagram does have a portion where like kind of having an unattainable lifestyle is what is attracting people, at least from what I've seen going on. They do want to see the nice cars or like the nice house or things of that nature, but I still think there's room to just be yourself and work with what you have.
How do we create high level visuals on these visual platforms like Instagram, for example, while still keeping it authentic? Like, how do we do a high quality brand shoot while keeping it authentic?
When it comes to that, I think the storytelling and the messaging behind the image is what's important. Like the actual caption and what you're saying in the image or in the video. I think that's where you can keep the relatability and really connect with people, because people do read your captions. You hook them in visually, but people go on and read the comments and read what you wrote. And I think that's where you can bring in the human factor.
I agree. I almost think that sometimes the emphasis is almost put in different buckets in weird ways. For people, it's like, oh, if I just have the pretty picture, then it'll do it for me. Or I have my marketing strategy down, but then like the content is just not it. And you're looking
Yeah.
like very unprofessional. And then it's like, well, everyone told me to go in this direction. And I just think that we have to take a very holistic approach on it and a very realistic approach. What's the culture of the platform?
Yep.
How are we aiding to that? I think where people kind of get a little confused is like they want to be on all of the platforms all the time, but then they want their content to be able to float on all of the platforms.
Yeah.
As a content creator yourself, and then creating spaces for content creators to create this type of content, how do you manage creating all of these types of content for all of these types of platforms?
I think when you're first starting out, let's say you're a solopreneur, you should focus all your energy in one platform. Basically, where your target audience is, put everything into that. So if it's YouTube, if it's Instagram, if it's TikTok, go where your people are. And once you're able to build systems and build a community, it's a lot easier to transfer that community onto other platforms. And that's when you can start diversifying your content or like curating it specifically for a different platform than the one you're already building on. So that's been my advice. Like if you're just starting out, if you're a more seasoned entrepreneur, you do have to understand the nuances of what's going to perform on Facebook may not necessarily do well on Twitter. Like those are just two completely different things. The best advice I could give is to understand each platform, understand the culture, and really study what people want. So look into your data, look into your analytics, create a business account on each platform so you can get access to that, and just keep tweaking, just keep trying. That's all you can do.
Totally. I love it. Let's say someone books out a studio for a full day. How can they create content, let's say for Instagram, that's more polished, and then also create content for TikTok that's maybe like in the moment, but they want to do it all in one day. They want to batch all of it. How do you suggest they use maybe your full day package inside of your studio and the various spaces around? How would you do that if you were a content creator coming in?
I would plan first and organize your schedule. If you're going to book a full day, you need to utilize your time to its best capacity. When it comes to Instagram, for instance, I would focus on reels, like visual hooks and nice images. When it comes to TikTok, people do just want the candid moment. So you can honestly just chill on the couch and just like have your phone like this. And that's going to be probably good enough. As long as you have like a compelling story, a compelling narrative, something to share, something insightful, it will definitely perform well on TikTok. For Instagram, it has to be more curated. And for TikTok, it could be more laid back.
I think the harder one to grasp, I feel like TikTok, we can chill on the couch for a few hours in the studio. We can have the nice background if we want to keep a certain level of aesthetic, but then you can kind of just riff on your iPhone. I do love the idea of like having a few hours dedicated to solely that. But I think people have such a hard time when it comes to creating that curated content. I think because it's a certain style and we have to keep it on brand and we have to keep it in this certain way. You had mentioned like a visual hook when it comes to creating your Instagram content. What do you mean by that? And how can we create this visual hook? What are we looking for?
When I try to figure out why I'm watching a reel or why I'm engaging, I ask myself those questions. Why did I look at this? How did it grab me? And I think once you start studying things from like a producer standpoint versus a consumer standpoint, you start to like crack the code. So visual hooks can look like anything. It could look like movement. It could look like cool editing tricks if you have an editor. It could be something cool you do with the camera. It could be something you're wearing. It could just be literally anything. Maybe just figure out a shot list, something that's already going viral or semi-viral in your industry. Create a shot list and just draw inspiration from it and figure out why it is so many people engage with this piece of content.
So what I'm hearing is like a visual hook is something that like grabs their attention.
Right.
About the imagery or about the scene. Like you said, you can do that with color. You can do that with even like the expression that you have.
Yeah, that's true. Yep.
I love it. So how are we prepping for this? How are we making sure we walk into this 5-hour content day and making sure we hit all of these points?
I would hire a team. It's really hard to like kind of hit everything by yourself. If you're scrambling as the photographer and the creator, it's too much. Like you want to use your time and your money to its best ability. So I would hire a team that this is all they do. This is their expertise. So you can just show up and just do the content that you need to do. If someone has a shot list for you, they've curated the outfits for you, they have a list of visual hooks, that is really going to be worthwhile and super valuable. So I would just hire some team members. WorkPlay is great for that. And that's what I would suggest.
It's so funny because it's one of those things where it's like, you can't really do it yourself unless you have a camera. You already have studied photography for like
Yeah.
10 years. You
Yep.
know how to work a manual camera. You know how to play with the light.
Yeah.
You set it on a tripod and then
Mm.
you have like a timer and then you go and you be the model. It
Yeah.
just doesn't make sense to do that. It's just one of those things where I'm like, this really has to be outsourced. It's almost like if you're doing it yourself, it's like, how much time are you spending doing that?
That's true. You're
You know
spending a
what I
lot
mean?
of time. The tripod, it's good for some things. You could do a lot of content with tripods, but I think it's really nice when the camera is zooming in and zooming out, and just doing that post edit may not make sense. Definitely hire a team to be stress free.
Yeah, I mean, you have to, and hire a team that can also plan it out. The logistics of things, if you think about it, that's a completely separate brain, right? Part of your
Mhm.
brain of like organizing logistics, organizing a content plan, and then like having someone to actually create the content. That's a whole nother part of your brain, this creative brain. You do need a team to make sure people are in their element of their skill set and their zone
Yes.
of genius. And it does take moving parts. Let's
Yep.
talk about when you actually have this content, you've done the content day in a studio, it's looking good. We've got visual hooks, we've got our TikTok content, we've got our Instagram curated content. What are we doing with this content? Are there any tips as like even just an influencer of batching content and then actually deploying it out, making sure it gets out there, not just sitting in a gallery?
I like to organize my gallery when I do a content shoot by aesthetic images. So something that's like maybe not my face is in it, but I have props or something like that. Really good for like real covers versus like the ones that I'm in. I would advise having both of those elements because you can use them on your website. You can use them for your blog, so many different uses. So select images that are visually interesting and organize them. Schedule them out. Plan your content out, whether you use a scheduler or whether you just want to use a content calendar. Actually plan when and where you're going to post. And then once it's live, you have to implement an engagement plan. Within the first hour of any algorithm, the more engagement that you give out, the better. So within the first hour, someone's commenting, make sure you try to comment back. Dedicate some time toward that. The fourth step would be to review your analytics, make sure that it's performing well, make adjustments, and then repeat this process every quarter. Plan a new shoot, get some refreshed images every quarter.
When it comes to the data and the analytics piece of it, we have our posting schedule. It's like we've got time laid out in the day to make sure we have engagement. But then when it comes to looking at the analytics, what are we looking at? And based off of that, what are we tweaking?
So when it comes to analytics and data, you have to know how to read it. What content is for saves versus what content is for shares? There is a difference. And it's like, how do you want to present your comment to like foster any of those type of call to actions? You can literally tell people to save and share it. That does help boost engagement. Or you can just see what's naturally doing that for you. Like go through your page and figure out, okay, you know what? I got a lot of shares from this because it was very educational. I got a lot of comments on this because I shared a slightly controversial opinion. And so once you understand that a piece of content is for a specific purpose, that's when you start seeing results.
Is there any way to see if we need to keep doing the same type of image, or is that almost like a personal preference, do you think?
It depends on what you're trying to get out of it. When I was building my following, I made sure my strategy aligned to like what my audience wanted to see. Because for instance, I started out as a realtor and that was what my page was for.
Yeah.
And when I started sharing financial advice, like how to save for a down payment, how you can sell, have a side hustle to make some extra bucks for it, stuff like that, people really like that. They did not like when I was showing home tours. Like it just didn't work for my page. So I started pivoting and I think that shifted everything for me. So it depends on like what you want to do and like how you're going to balance that out.
That makes a lot of sense. And I know that there's so many realtors in our WorkPlay method. And something that we've always preached is like, do not create visuals just like where we could just see that on Zillow. Anyone can go on their Zillow app, and most people do. And they just like look through homes, just
As a
even
hobby.
as a hobby, right? It's a
Yeah.
fun pastime. It's like, we don't need another home image. We need to know how we actually get the home.
Yeah. So like, how can you be different really?
Totally.
Think outside the box.
So when it comes to educating your audience on like what they need, the messaging, I feel like we have that down. Now, tell me a little bit more about like how are we positioning ourselves aesthetically, because that's always been super interesting to me. It's like we've got the educational piece down. How do we decide on an aesthetic? How do we adhere to that aesthetic continuously? And do we have to? What's the advantages of doing that?
There definitely are advantages to adhering to one aesthetic. My advice for even developing one is coming up with a brand board. So knowing your colors, your fonts, sticking to that, sticking to like a particular mood. What mood do you want to invoke in people? What mood do you want to convey? That's probably the easiest way of sticking to it. But it doesn't have to be so black and white. Like you don't have to always do that. Sometimes in the beginning phases, you should be experimenting. You should be trying all different types of content and seeing what comes natural to you and also what people are gravitating toward, because things are always changing, algorithms always changing, so you still have to keep testing, but just stay true to at least your colors, your fonts, and like kind of the basics of your brand.
That makes sense. And when you say like a mood, what do you mean by that? How does someone create, let's say, like a more edgy mood or something like that,
Mhm.
or a more light and flowy mood? Like, what in your visual brain, what are the types of things are we thinking about?
I'm thinking like textures when it comes to mood, like textures, what emotion is associated with a certain image or piece of content. Like when you said edgy, I'm thinking like metal or dark colors, black, something different. And when it comes to light and airy, I'm thinking lighter colors, beiges, natural tones, flowy garments. So like just having a vocabulary and adjectives around your brand, like that can start the process of understanding your aesthetic.
And then essentially bringing that into the shoe. So like
Yes.
bringing the metals into the shoe, bringing the
Right.
texture of the moodiness into the shoe, whether
Yeah.
it be like the background or the clothing. That makes a lot of
Correct.
sense.
Yeah.
As far as how we are creating that in your studio, if someone was to do like a dark and moody, but
Mhm.
we wanted a nice like beige, white, neutral, what are some of the things that we could pull in?
I would advise like a prop list. A lot of my clients, they bring their journals, they bring their laptops, they bring their coffee mugs, they bring multiple outfits. Just knowing what props to bring in so you can play with the mood and understand like how you can contrast that against the studio. That's the way to go. Anything that you could think of, your pens, your stationery, all of the above.
Just to kind of round this out, why, and I know that you kind of touched on this, but our WorkPlay members are creating content on a quarterly basis already, or they're wanting to. Why do you think that is so important based off of everything that you've kind of touched on in this episode?
As an owner, you always need to have content. That's just kind of the name of the game now. Like you have to show up online. You're missing out if you're not. That should be a part of your overall business objectives. Be online. Aiming for a quarterly shoot. You got 20 reels batched out. Like not only does that take away like the stress and the headache of having to do it like every day, if you do it all in one setting and you batch out your content, that's just another thing off your plate and you're still able to show up. And that's the importance of it.
That makes sense. It's so funny that I know it's 2025, but I still don't think people fully understand how much you need in order
Mhm.
to get this content out. What would you say to someone who like just does a brand shoot maybe once a year?
I would say that's not enough. I would say it's not enough because not only are your competitors showing up every day, it's required now. Like we are in 2025 and all these platforms are thriving. People are becoming multimillionaires off of it. So like you definitely need to put your hat in the ring in order to break out of the saturated market. Like that's the only way is to at least show up more than once a year. Like you need to have curated image once a quarter.
I think that a lot of at least business owners and the people who are listening to this podcast, they're reusing a lot of that same content. Is there a downside to that? Reusing the same image that you really love for this launch versus the website and all of that. From your opinion, in your research, what have you found around that versus creating a new version of different images?
Yeah, you can definitely repurpose content, but there is like a threshold for how often you can do that before people just, it loses the excitement, it loses the appeal. So if you are going to launch something in particular, that would be a great opportunity to give people something new to look at. If you're going to launch a website, if you're launching a new product, if you're launching a new service, if you're making a comeback, whatever it is, like, or you reached a milestone, like those are all opportunities to show something new to your audience. I am a fan of like repurposing content, but you can only do it to a certain extent. So you're kind of running the risk of losing engagement and losing excitement if you're constantly repurposing things.
Yeah, it's like you have to create an element of surprise when someone is scrolling because you're not just competing with other people in your industry. You're competing
Yeah.
with like someone's wedding that they just had,
Yeah.
or you're competing with someone's birthday or them posting their weekend photo dump, right? You're competing for elements of attention in your
Right.
consumer. I just am in the firm belief because you can just see it. It's like when someone's reusing, it's like, oh, I've seen that before. I skip. It's like the visual isn't pulling them in
Yes.
and there's no like interruption in their typical scroll, right?
Yeah.
So many people are mindlessly scrolling. I think we all do it. How are you capturing someone in that? It's not even a 30-second window. That would
Yeah, it's
be
like an instant. You have like 3 seconds.
that
How are
30
you going to capture
seconds.
their attention? Yeah.
I was reviewing a WorkPlay gallery the other day, and one of the WorkPlay member, she does things with like SEO, and she had a magnifying glass up to her eye, and the photo was like the magnifying glass was distorting her one eye. And I was like, that's so genius in terms of the direction because it's something so different. And not saying everyone needs to like distort their face with a magnifying glass, but like
Right.
that just slight
It's something
pattern.
you haven't seen before. Like,
Right. It's
very
like, oh,
creative.
that's different. That's
Yeah.
not what's on my typical feed. I just think that people need to come out of the box a little bit. I think we all want to kind of like fit into a certain type of aesthetic or a certain type of look or feel. You then blend in, right? If
Yeah.
everyone's doing it, it's like you have to constantly think of new ideas of like, how is this going to interrupt the pattern of scroll?
I completely agree. Like, how are you going to stop the scroll? How are you going to capture attention? And really, how can you differentiate yourself? Because yeah, Instagram, it just follows trends, and you have to figure out how you're going to be the trendsetter.
Yeah, and that in itself can be a little bit hard. And I do think you have to set aside time to think, right?
Yeah,
I think we're constantly consuming and then we can't even think it's like, I'm going to do that because I saw it. Well, it only works because so and so did that
very true.
themselves. You can't really put that on yourself. You have to kind of come with what is going to work for you. And I think those are original ideas. When you are working as an influencer, how are you coming up with your creative ideas for you? What does that
Yes.
creative process look like?
I draw inspiration from anything and anywhere. I do keep up with what a particular platform is doing just to like know, because sometimes it's maybe convenient to hop on a trend and you can really do well with that. But the best ideas come from outside of the platforms, in all honesty. I like to scroll on Tumblr. Like, that's crazy. People don't go on Tumblr anymore, but I still like going on Tumblr. And so I find a lot of ideas there because people aren't really over there. But it's wild that it's still a community. I still get a lot of ideas from it. Or it'll just be like from regular everyday life. It could be from a conversation where I think of an idea and I write it down. It could just be from sitting still and something pops into my brain. It can come from anywhere and everywhere. You have to be open, and it kind of like a practice too of getting into your creative element.
I totally agree. I think anyone can do it. It's just do you set aside time to do it? Do you give yourself
Yeah, that's the other thing. It's a trade-off.
like do you
If
give
it's
yourself
not your vibe, don't do it. Outsource. Like,
Totally. And do you give yourself permission to show up in like a really different way? I think a lot of us are like judging ourselves based off of how
yes.
we show up because it is so visual. And a lot of WorkPlay members, at least, are the faces of their brand. So a lot of things come up when you are the face of the brand and you have to be on the stage, right? Inside of the content. But I love the idea of searching Tumblr. That has never even occurred to me. I didn't even realize it was still in motion and
Yeah.
working.
It's a thing for me. I don't know. Like, I go on there and it's been nice. I did used to like Tumblr a lot, and now I've been back on it for like the last couple months, and I'm like, okay.
Are you searching on Tumblr in the way that you would search on Pinterest?
Not necessarily. I just kind of curated my feed. Like, I follow certain creators. People are always constantly like reposting. That's what Tumblr is like. You repost other creators' images. And so I get a lot of interesting things just from following a select few people.
Interesting. That is such a nice, hot, tangible tip. It's like before your workplace shoot, go onto Tumblr.
Yeah, because it's different from all the other platforms. I like it.
100%. Well, it has been such a treat to have you on the WorkPlay podcast. I know you have a few gifts for WorkPlay listeners and WorkPlay members when it comes to your studio, especially if you're doing WorkPlay shoots. We're constantly looking for natural light. We're constantly looking for that because we know that that does so much better with visual campaign and it comes across as more candid, human, like more
Yes.
real life. And so if we're going to do a studio, it's got to be natural light. And so now with your studio, we do have a go-to studio in Miami. Whether you are flying in and doing your workplace shoot or you live in Miami as a WorkPlay member, you've got a really amazing space here, and Ariel has a few perks.
Yeah, so I'm excited to share the perks that I'm going to share with all the WorkPlay members. You're going to get a 10% discount on hourly bookings and 20% discount on half day and full day bookings. And then we are partnered together. If you want to do a full content shoot and spend the whole day curating 30 days, 60 days worth of content, we are working together in that capacity.
I love it. So all of your WorkPlay creative directors, just let them know. I mean, they will already know if you're shooting in Miami. We've got a code for you. So when you're booking Ariel's studio, you will now be able to get a discount on that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ariel, for coming on. Where can everyone find you and connect with you?
The Content Studio's Instagram handle is at Selva Lofts, spelled Selva Lofts, as that's also our website, selvalofts.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.